our Board of Supervisors offices, in addition to city representatives, lots of cities represented here, which is truly exciting, in addition to our nonprofit and faith-based partners, also seeing some county folks here. So thank you for joining us. Laura, if you're ready, we can go ahead and get started.
Yes, definitely. Good morning to everybody. My name is Laura Gonzalez, and I am assisting the coordination of the one count. So welcome to everybody. One of the couple of requests that I have is last meeting we had about 100 individuals that logged in, which is great. But we didn't get a lot of information about those joining us. So if you have a second, can you in the chat just put your name and the name of your agency that you represent? That would be really helpful for us to track attendance and know who's joining us. So during any time at the meeting, during the meeting, you can do that. So please, if you wouldn't mind doing that. We are recording the meeting so that we can share it with anyone that is not able to participate or join us today. So that's just something we wanted to share with you. I also wanted to just start this meeting with sharing this new logo that we have. We're very happy to now have a point and time count logo for Riverside County. Let us know your thoughts, but I think it's really fun to be able to start branding the point and time count for Riverside County. And so like Tanya mentioned, we are going to be focusing today on methodology. And so we'll go ahead and get started with today's meeting. A bit about the agenda, like I said, focusing on methodology, doing a really quick review of the summary from the last meeting. And of course, always giving enough time for our partners to provide feedback as we progress through this presentation. Jamie, would you mind helping me letting people in that are in the lobby as I continue?
Yeah, I'm doing that already.
Perfect, thank you.
Sure.
So just a quick summary about the last meeting, if you weren't able to join us. We did talk a little bit about what HUD had recently released in terms of guidance. One of the big information, or the biggest piece of information that we received is basically HUD letting us know as a COC that we have a couple of options, or what they refer to as flexibilities. And our focus really today is going to be on the head count only. We think that because of all of the coronavirus, the impact the coronavirus has had, the best and safest way to proceed would be with a head count only of people that are experiencing unsheltered homelessness. So that means no data collection on demographics, subpopulations, or household characteristics. We'll tell you a little bit more what that's going to look like. But like we mentioned during our last meeting, County Public Health is strongly recommending avoiding any face-to-face interviews due to the high number of cases and high positivity rates. So we really want to keep everyone safe. Just as a reminder, again, the housing will not be penalizing COCs with any loss of points in the 2020 program application. So just know that it's not going to affect that piece of the COC. So like I mentioned, we're going to talk a little bit about the methodology and kind of what we have in mind and some of the recommendations. So one of the flexibilities that HUD has allowed is that typically they allow 7 days for the count. In previous years, that's the time range, the length of days that we have. For this 2020 count, they have allowed 14 days. As with anything, I think there's pros and cons. So we're kind of listing a couple of pros and cons for us to consider. And as we're thinking about these pros and cons, we have a recommendation of conducting the count during 3 days. So if we look at the general count, we would maybe start the day, not maybe, we would start the count on Wednesday, January 27th and do a 3-day count. For the youth, the same thing. Generally, the youth and the general count start at the same time. youth has a different approach, but definitely a 3-day count for the youth as well. In terms of time, we have had some recent guidance from HUD about the time, and so we're trying to figure that out. As with anything with this point in time count planning, the process is going to be evolving as we need. So we'll keep you updated. But the time, we're still trying to determine what recommendation we're going to have for the time of the count. I hope I'm not going too fast, but does anybody have any comments or feedback regarding the when of the point in time count? The length, 3 days, and starting on a Wednesday, ending on a Friday for both the general and the point in, and the youth count.
Laura, looks like Greg Rodriguez has his hand up.
Yes, thank you.
Hey, Laura,
Danny.
good morning.
Good morning, Greg.
On the 3-day time span, what's the thought of utilizing the geolocator to basically prevent duplication? So like, for instance, you know, if we've got a large number mapped, that then we can target, say, a different area that would kind of prevent that duplication.
Yes, definitely. There's going to be components of the point in time count in place that will prevent that. We will definitely be using the app, the Survey 123 app, so that we can do precise locations of where people were observed. So that's definitely going to help. But with that, like I said, I mentioned, with the cons, the longer that we do the count, the higher risk for duplication. So we definitely want to avoid that. So we think for 3 days would be a good range where we can still have a little bit of control over that.
Agreed.
Especially because we're not going to be collecting any demographics or any other data.
Right. Agree. Yep.
So yes, we will, and we'll talk about the how, which will include the survey. Cities, do we have any feedback in terms of the when of the point in time count? I mean, I know I see a lot of city representatives, so I appreciate that you're joining us. Any feedback on time frame for the count? I would think that not very many of us would want to extend this count more than we need to. You know, we want to go ahead and get it started and finished as quickly and successfully as possible. So,
Laura,
any
we do
feedback?
have a comment from someone in the chat box by the name of Eva. She states,
okay.
For the smaller cities that generally don't ask for outside volunteers, 1 day may be sufficient.
Okay. Yes, great, definitely. So we'll talk a little bit about the how as well, in terms of how we want to look at the county to canvass the entire county. But yeah, definitely, it wouldn't be 3 days for every city. So I'll talk a little bit about a regional approach that we're thinking of. But yes, 1 day is definitely going to be enough for the smaller cities.
Hey, Laura.
Yes.
Laura, this is Joe Coletti. Could I comment?
Yes. Of course.
Quick comment going back to
Welcome,
Greg's comments.
Definitely.
I just wanted to point out that when it comes to mapping folks as they're being counted, and yeah, you have the benefit of geography of helping with any duplication, but you also have the ability of things being time stamped. So, sometimes by using the timestamp, like, oh, these persons were counted at this time, now, oh, these persons were counted at this other time. Sometimes using the timestamp helps. I've seen it where you can see that perhaps there was duplication. So I just wanted to point out the value of the timestamp.
That's a great point, Joe. Thank you so much. Yeah, that mobile survey is really helpful. It's really made a difference in how we conduct the point in time count. Anybody else that has any feedback about the when of the count?
There is another comment in the chat box, Laura, and Joe, you may be able to help us with this question. But if not doing a count is a valid option per HUD, so requesting an exception from conducting an unsheltered count, why are we going to risk duplication with a 3-day head count?
So I'm not sure if I understood that. I was looking in the chat box real quick.
So basically, right, we're spreading out the head count, and I think what I would just add is for all of us to keep in mind that the head count requires no face-to-face interaction, and we'll be talking a little bit more in detail, and we'll need to figure out the logistics of how that would work, but keeping in mind that that could be right, it would be similar to an observation count where from a distance, a surveyor would, count the number of people that are likely to be homeless in an area. But Joe, based on the way the question is written in the chat box, right, the concern is, well, why are we spreading it out to 3 days versus 1 day if we're trying to address the risk?
I think also the question before you answer, Joe, I think the first part of the question is if HUD is actually saying we don't have to do a count, then why are we risking a duplication by doing 3 days? Like they're saying that we don't even have to do a count. We can request an exception. So why are we moving forward with it? If I understand the first piece of the question as well.
Yeah. So there's two pieces here. I mean, yeah. So on the one, we in the end we have to actually request an exception to do a head count over 3 days to begin with, and we have to see if HUD's going to approve that to begin with, right? So if they did approve it, then the way that duplication is prevented is that you're counting in each region, on a different day with the assumption that people are not moving from one region to the other, at least that there's not any, large number of folks, that there's very few folks, if any, that are going to be moving from one region to the other. But now going back to the other part and saying, okay, well, wait a minute, if we're going to do a 3-day count and we're going to do all this effort, well, what about not doing an unsheltered count at all?
Correct.
And Laura, I know you're going to get into that a little bit. But yeah, that you're going to get into more how that's an option, right?
Mm-hmm. Correct.
So maybe I'll just wait until you get to that point.
Okay.
Laura, we have a hand up, Robin Reed, if you'd like to speak.
Just a question about that duplication in the count for 3 days. Is there a factor that HUD's going to use to create like a margin of error for a duplication, or are they just going to take the raw data?
This is Joe. So HUD does not do that. That's done locally. But it's going to be really tough to be able to come up with a duplication factor locally, because the duplication factor would generally be figured out, or you would rely on past data, past counts. And so since this is an apples to oranges situation, it's really hard to come up with a duplication factor. I suppose we could explore that if we really had to and kind of look at it very closely, but it's going to be kind of a guess at that point. But I can say this, that over the years I've been involved in homeless counts all over, with a lot of COCs, duplication rate in the past has always been pretty small. Less than 3%, often 1%, sometimes just 0.5%. I've never seen it where it's been very large anywhere.
So we won't be penalized. No one will be penalized if there is a slight overcount, I guess was my point.
Oh, no, not penalized. HUD's not going to penalize because you have an increase in homelessness. No.
Yeah. I think
Okay.
they've been around that, yeah. Okay, thank you so much for those questions. Anybody else that has any question regarding the when of the point in time count? Okay, we'll continue. So where will the unsheltered count take place? So this is kind of something we were referring to. Our recommendation is to divide the county into regions. The logistics we haven't really dove into, but this is just kind of an overview of and the thought of looking at Riverside County by region. And so we would select a region one to go on the first day and then be done. Then region 2 on Thursday and then be done. So that goes back to Eva's comment about the smaller cities. We don't need 3 days. We really wouldn't be doing 3 days. We would just be dividing the county into 3 days, and every region would have their day for us to count. Remember, we are going to be limited in terms of volunteers, so this will help as well. Usually we do the count one day across the 28 cities in Riverside County, with everyone being mobilized on the same day and canvassing for a 4-hour time frame. This will help alleviate a little bit of the need for volunteers. So on the first day, we would just focus on a couple of cities and have everybody working on doing the best they can in terms of canvassing the neighborhoods and doing a count. And so we think that might be a good approach to where to count. We would still definitely be using our mapping areas and in the form of the soft counts. So if some of you are new to the count, generally about a week to 3 days before the count, we have law enforcement assist and anybody really that is able to or is out in the field conduct soft counts. And so they will map where they're observing homeless in their cities. And then we would use that data to know where to go on the day of the count. We do have an app, a feature of the Survey 123 app that allows us to do a soft count. So we would be able to give that access to whoever is going to be doing the soft counts, so that once we are ready to go out to count on the day of the count, we would have at least the most recent data of homeless in the community. We will definitely, in terms of mapping, need 2 lead agencies to help with that and determine, what region is going to be region 1, what region is going to be region 2. So once again, we go back to anybody that would like to participate and lead this effort that is familiar with the mapping and is familiar with that type of planning to help us with that. And then once we have a committee, then they can kind of go into the logistics of it and create the maps and so forth. We did bring up last time the deployment sites. Once again, previously, when we did the count, every city had a deployment site where volunteers would check in. One of our city partners mentioned that some of the locations that they've used in the past are accessible because of COVID-19. So that would be something that we would want to talk about as well in this committee, determine whether it's going to be a parking lot where people meet, or if we're going to do something where everyone's going to be assigned their location through email and they don't have to meet. So those are all logistical questions that we could definitely determine as we continue with the planning. But those are some of the wheres of the point in time count. Any questions about kind of where we're going with that?
Laura, we have a hand raised, and it is Robin Reed.
Oh, sorry, that was from last time. I didn't put it down. I apologize.
Oh,
That's okay. Anything else you would like to add to that, Joe?
Not at this time.
Great. Any city leaders that have any feedback?
Karen Roper has her hand raised.
Hello, Karen. Good morning. We can't hear you. You're muted. Oh.
So you know what? She wrote in the chat box, Laura, can you address
you hear me?
incentives?
Oh, there you are.
Good morning, everybody. How are you doing?
We're good, Karen. Thank you for joining us today.
Question, how are we handling incentives for the, oh, that's a dumb question. We're not going to have any interaction. Never mind.
Well, actually, that is not a bad question, Karen. It's a good question because we do plan on having incentives. Yes, it is very likely that we won't interact with individuals as we're doing the count, but during the soft counts and even during the time that we're on the field, we may have the opportunity to provide incentives to the homeless population. So we want to be ready. So we do actually have a great news from Kaiser. They do an annual donation drive for all their staff and all their hospitals. They've provided incentive packs for the point in time count in previous years, and this year they're going to be donating 500 of those incentive packs. And I don't know if some of you saw those incentive packs last year, but they're very generous. They're just huge bags of full-sized hygiene products, and so they've committed to giving us 500. We will have a need to do a committee. I'm always talking about committees, using everybody to participate, but a committee to determine how they're going to be distributed, picking them up from Kaiser. All of those types of tasks are important, and we need help making sure that everybody has at least some incentive packs. Generally, for the youth point in time count, Operation Safe House is always very generous as well in providing the hygiene kits for the youth. But we will definitely make sure that we have at least a small amount of incentives as we're out counting, just to make sure that if we do come across someone with a need, we are able to hand those out. Tanya, did you want to say anything else about that?
No, I think you covered it. I was just going to echo what you said and say, Karen, it is not a dumb question. We thought of that. We still have street outreach teams, right, that are going out day to day. And as Laura mentioned, we'll be going out ahead of time to perform the soft count. So there's a lot of good stuff in those hygiene bags that can help keep people safe, like sanitizer, and so forth. So we want to make sure that those get into the hands of the people that we serve.
Well, thank you, because I just think anytime we have an opportunity to build a relationship and engage, we're doing that actively in Corona right now. So I know we have to be mindful of COVID-19, but also it is an opportunity, and I think we can still do it safely. So thank you both very much.
Of course. Okay. Anybody else that has any feedback about the where of the count? And for the youth count, I think that's also something that we're going to have to look at. But once again, once we develop the methodology and we all know how the count is going to be implemented, then we can kind of focus on the youth count and their needs are very different from the general count. So we'll make sure that that's taken care of as well. I don't know if some of you, yesterday we were able to send out the homeless outreach team's survey to all of our partners. We want to get an idea of how many homeless outreach teams are currently out in the field that could possibly assist us during the count. Once again, we're going to be leaning towards what we refer to as the professional counters. They are there, and they have a better grasp on interacting with the population that we're trying to count. So I'm sure you did receive the survey, but if you have a couple of minutes, please complete the survey. Not only is it asking about your homeless outreach teams, but it is also asking if there's other pieces or components of the count that you may be interested in assisting with. So it's a very, very short 5-question survey. It will take 2 minutes of your time, so please take some time to complete it. So who will conduct the unsheltered count? Right now, our money is on the homeless outreach teams, but we also have service-based agencies that may be able to assist, county department staff, social service providers. If there is anyone that you think is missing from this list that we could take advantage of, or that have that skill set that we need for the count, please let us know so that we can look into that possibility. Generally, when we think of the who, we think of our community volunteers, and we set a volunteer goal. This year is going to be a little different, but we will definitely have a volunteer goal. We've kind of come up with a number of 100 professional counters. And now, once again, if we look at the where, it would be, for example, 100 counters that would count on the first day of the count, on Wednesday in Region 1. They would then go out and do count in Region 2 the next day, and then Friday count in Region 3. So they would be very busy. And this number is a lot lower than what we're usually used to, which is last year we had 842 volunteers. But we feel like it is definitely a strong number. And because it's going to be kind of a drive-by counting, observational counting, we think we can manage with 100. In terms of the youth count, that number is also very different. We have to kind of begin meeting with the youth committee so that they can determine what would be a good number for the youth count. So we definitely want to set a goal for the youth count in terms of volunteers as well. Any, go ahead. Go ahead.
I just wanted to add, I know you had county departments, but I just wanted to stress, I know you and I have talked about the importance of making sure we partner with our parks and public safety teams, including animal services and code enforcement. I don't see that Chris Marr from code enforcement is on today, but I know that he is very interested in supporting this effort, and so I'll need to reach out to him separately after this meeting to see, the extent of their participation. But I just want to make sure that we keep all those teams in mind, because as we know, they often reach out to homeless outreach teams, right? They know where our people are at and can help with that navigation piece.
Definitely, yes. Thank you for reminding, for making that comment, Tanya. Anybody else? Any other comments from cities? City representatives? Public safety? Okay. So the how. Oh, you're muted, Tanya.
Thank you. We're all learning to keep an eye on. I appreciate you catching that. So Maria Lopez from One Come Unity made a comment in the chat box saying, what about reaching out to local church outreach teams to help? We definitely want to involve our faith-based communities. Our leadership team, Heidi, our director, is often reminding me to make sure that we're including our faith-based, our local churches. So if anyone has suggestions on the best way to do that, we do have connections through different collaboratives. I'm thinking of CARES. I know we now think of it with associate that with the federal funding, but there is a CARES program that is an initiative consisting of different faith-based community partners in Riverside County who come together to support children who are reunited with their families, and they help provide furniture to those families when they're reunited with their children. So I'm thinking of maybe using that, connecting with that team and to help connect them with the survey. But certainly if other folks have suggestions, or if you are directly connected to a church and can connect us with them, we would love to reach out and include them. Absolutely.
Yes, I think the key point that Tanya just made is us reaching out to someone that we really don't know makes it more difficult. And if someone knows someone that has worked with that community partner, I think we appreciate you reaching out to them and kind of making that connection for us, and us following up with them, only because it'll increase the likelihood that they'll participate with us, because you're pretty much recommending it. So yeah, if you have anybody that you think should be at these meetings, we do have the calendar, and I will share that with you, and you can always share that with anybody. These are public community planning meetings, so anyone is welcome to provide feedback on how we move forward with the count. Okay, so we'll go ahead and move forward in the how. And now remember, as we are kind of progressing through all of these meetings, we are starting to build our methodology. And a big piece, and an important piece is really the how. The how will the Unsheltered count be conducted. And I'm going to go ahead and give the mic over to Joe Coletti, who can give us an idea of what we will do with the data once we collect it, to make sure that we provide the most accurate numbers possible. Thank you, Joe.
Sure thing, Lord. Okay, so this is Joe. By way of the head count, just to talk a little bit more about that before the blitz count and before extrapolation, on the head count, one of the things that needs to be clear is that, or needs to be understood by everybody, is that HUD prefers head counts to be done overnight, meaning like between 10 p.m. or midnight and into till sunrise, 2 in the morning, 4 in the morning, etc. So what we're doing, and not just us, but there's other continuums are doing the same thing, and that is asking HUD to do a head count during the day. And so that has to be part of the request, and HUD has to approve that, and obviously we talked about duplication. They're concerned, well, how would we prevent duplication? And we'd have to say how we're going to do that in the ways that, some of the ways that we already discussed, to be able to do a head count during the day. So I just want to make sure that that's understood. And again, that the request has to be made for the exception, and it has to be approved. If you're saying, well, wait a minute, if HUD didn't approve it, what happens then? Well, the only other option that's left is not to do an unsheltered count at all, period. So I just want to make sure that that's understood. Then number two, the blitz count. I mean, that goes back to duplication, right? How do you avoid duplication? And that is that, you're trying to count folks, during a period of time in which you can have as narrow of a time frame, a time period as possible, but not too narrow that it's going to hinder a thorough count. So what do you do with that? In terms of a blitz count, is that you really, again, it's just based upon the fact that you're trying to have count with a narrow period of time as possible, but not in a way that it's going to hinder you from getting a solid count. So obviously it's a balance act. I mean, one of the things that I am going back and forth with HUD on a little bit, in terms of the head count and the blitz count, is that, well, if HUD, you're less comfortable with head counts happening during the day, day hours, what about during the evening hours? What about like 7 p.m. to 11 p.m., something like that? And the response was, well, that's a little better than a day count. We still prefer overnight, but an evening is better than the day count because there's less movement, etc. But then that would be a real big change for us in a sense that you would have the professional volunteers going out during evening hours, which creates all problems, including like if the count was tomorrow, we have a statewide curfew that begins at 10 o'clock at night. And then I'll just lastly comment about extrapolation and then pause there. But so, extrapolation is, basically you're inferring the known from the unknown, right? You're trying to account for areas where perhaps there was low counts, or maybe there was an area that we thought we were going to get a count but didn't. And so then how do you infer the known from the unknown? Well, you have to look at data that you do have to see what you don't have, and to pull from the data that you have to actually make some assumptions about data that you don't have. So basically, it's semi-scientific at best, extrapolation, and because there's some unknown factors in there. But basically, this even goes back to the mapping. The command center. You're seeing where your data is coming in. You're seeing where it's not coming in. That provides opportunity to then extrapolate comparisons from to past years. Helps. And then it was mentioned before, Laura, you mentioned it before about you have up to 14 days, but now HUD has extended the period. Though, when we talk about the 14 days, I do want to note that we are talking about a head count of 3 days, 3 different regions, because even though HUD has said, hey, you got 14 days, the bottom line is they would like it as short of a period as possible. So 3 days falls within what HUD's comfortable with. And you got to remember too, that when you're counting on the 3rd day on a Friday, there's always that issue of whether the person was homeless Wednesday night. Chances are that's true, right? But that's something that you have to take a little bit of a closer look at as well. So this, if it all sounds a little tricky, it's because it is a little tricky.
Yeah. Yes. Thank you, Joe. I also wanted to just mention, as we're building this methodology and what we're going to be proposing to HUD through our request, within, I'd say, the next 2 weeks, maybe early January, is when the county is going to, based on all this conversation we've had with our community partners, come up with the request for exemption. We will submit a methodology plan to HUD for their approval. So right now, as we're discussing all of these components of the count, we're building it as best as it will allow for the county's needs. So right now, we still have not made any kind of request to HUD, but that is definitely something that they need from us, like Joe mentioned, and we will plan on doing that probably in early January.
I'm glad you shared that.
Okay.
Go ahead, Joe.
Now, I was going to say it'd be worth noting that we're going to be having a teleconference, meaning the Southern California Continuums of Care are going to have its 4th teleconference with HUD, with William Snow, who's the point-in-time person for HUD. When you want anything point in time, you go to William. And William will have a teleconference with him next Wednesday, which will be our 4th one since over the last few months. So we've been really on top of this with HUD as much as we can. And so we're going to learn more next Wednesday. So I guess that's just wanting to note that for everybody.
Thank you, Joe. I was just going to echo what Laura said in regards to, we are still determining our methodology, and that is why having you participate in these community planning meetings are so important. In case we did not say it earlier, know that we are diligently taking notes. So if you see me looking down or just like busy, looking at the screen, you may see my fingers bouncing up and down. It's because we are making note of the feedback that you are providing. So we want to hear from you. Feel free to unmute yourself to provide your comments. In saying that, I actually see a comment from Linda Krupa, I believe from the city of Hemet. Hello, and thank you for joining us. Is one of the options we are looking at is not to conduct a count due to the increasing risk. So yes, this has been a large discussion in some of the planning meetings that we have participated in. We are, again, working very closely with public health in addition to getting feedback from our partners, looking at what other local continuums of care are doing and how they are going to be moving forward. As we know, the climate is changing day to day, and some of us, right, in watching the news, know that there are going to be some heavier restrictions that are going to be coming to California as a whole, that the governor is set to release. I saw some additional guidelines published yesterday. So know that we are tuning in to the meeting that Joe referenced earlier. And while that option is definitely at the table, we haven't, just know that that option is definitely at the table, and we are looking at all those things that I referenced to make sure that we make a good decision on how to proceed forward.
Thank you, Tanya. Appreciate that information.
And Tanya, can I just frame something? I know this has been said already, but I just think it's worth just framing it one more time. What in light of is an option of not doing a count? We are going to request an exception from HUD to do a head count during the day. That we may not get approval for that. Not just us, but other COCs are going to be doing it too. We may not get approval for that. If we didn't get approval for that, well, I did mention earlier a little bit ago that, well, HUD may be open to doing a head count, during evening hours, but again, 7 to 11, 8 to midnight, something like that. I mean, would you even want to do that? Even if that was an option, would you want to do that? And if neither one of those are an option, then the only other option that's left on the table is you're not to do an unsheltered count.
And I also think that the key word is, as someone mentioned, what the county feels comfortable doing, right? There's some things that we could do that we may not feel comfortable doing because we would be putting individuals at risk, and we're not comfortable with that. So at some point, the county will need to decide what we can move forward with, that we're comfortable with, and what we can't move forward with because we're not comfortable with it. I think that's really important. And that's why I think we're waiting until we finish kind of getting an idea of what the county can do, what we feel comfortable doing and proposing to HUD, and then we can move forward from there. So it's good that we're waiting a couple of more weeks to have these discussions. Thank you, Joe. And so we will continue with the how. Any questions from the how of the count? I think that's kind of, once we've gathered the data, the how is going to be, once it's gathered, then we can kind of look at those multipliers, and we can look at the extrapolation methods and all of those to ensure that we're submitting sound data to HUD. Okay, so that once again, the head count based on an observation method. Did you want to talk about this piece, Joe?
Yeah, I mean, again, this is meant to be a no contact, no face-to-face head count methodology. So basically, what you're looking at is a question that HUD has put. This is a HUD question, you know, that they post as something that that COCs can use, and that is, how certain are you that the person meets HUD's criteria of staying in a place not meant for human habitation, you know, e.g. blah, blah, blah. This is HUD language. The option definitely is also HUD language. So is possibly, and so is not sure. The word likely is not HUD language. I kind of threw that in, right? But everything else is HUD language. And the idea would be, if you were counting, is that person definitely homeless, likely homeless, possibly homeless, or not sure? You know, and again, no contact.
Any questions about that? So once again, that would be a question that we would have on our device as we're canvassing the community. Then we can answer that question. Go ahead, Joe.
Yeah, and I was going to say, I can see Connie Golds was saying, I was wondering the difference between likely and possibly. Yeah, like I said, I'm the one that threw the word likely in. Everything else is HUD language. You know, it just seemed to me that, and you know, you have to use the word likely included, but you know, it just seemed to me to go from definitely to possibly. You know, if we were sitting there looking at, you know, definitely, possibly, what about likely? And then, you know, you can always see how many likelies you get, and to determine afterwards as to how many likelies you include in the count. That could be done through extrapolation as well. Same thing with possibly. You know, just because it was possibly, you may not necessarily throw everybody out, not include everybody who was noted as possibly. You can come up with a formula, you can extrapolate. That would say, oh, out of those possiblies, I'm going to make this number up. 50% we would include as part of the count. 50% we wouldn't. I'm not saying to do that. I just came up with an example.
Thank you, Joe. Any questions? Any questions about how we would determine as we are counting heads, how we would consider someone to, how we would rank really a person in terms of the likelihood that they're homeless?
Ma'am, this is Officer Loza of Beaumont, please.
Yes.
Okay, so for whatever team that's going to be assigned to the city of Beaumont again, I am one of the officers that's basically in charge of, you know, I'm part of the business district and or business liaison officer, and also in charge of transient issues. So whatever teams that's going to come out to Beaumont, I'll basically have a list of all of our local transients. I think we had 17 to 19 last year. You know, because I deal with them on a day-to-day basis. You know, I have them documented. You know, I know them by face, I know them by names, etc. And also, having that said, there are, you know, with Riverside Sheriff's Department, with whatever other PDs, I'm sure there are all other homeless teams assigned to those departments, because I was with the Riverside Sheriff's Department as well. They could also do the same. You know, 6 feet. I mean, we could all contact these subjects individually. 6 feet. We have to contact them face to face on a daily basis. From here until January 27th, we get to, you know, maintain a log of the subjects that we contact, you know, just to get a better count, you know, more accurate count. So, just my suggestion. So, whatever team, I'll have an accurate count for my team.
Thank you. That is generally the way that we've conducted the count in the past. We rely definitely on law enforcement for the reasons you just mentioned, that you know them personally, and you are a key to ensuring that we make sure to count everyone in the cities. So yeah, that is a great idea. There is no reason why we can't start having individuals be logged. or log where we're observing individuals living in the streets. Generally, the rule that we follow is a week before we do a really quick soft count, only because they move around in some of the cities. But that's definitely a strategy that we've relied on in the past, and I think would be useful for this count as well. So thank you for that. Any other questions or comments before we continue? Joe, did you want to talk a little bit about the vehicle count focus?
Sure. On the vehicle count, the idea behind the vehicle count is twofold this year. One is that HUD requires counts to include people who are living homeless in their vehicles. But this year, anecdotally, more and more people are saying that, hey, well, maybe that's one way that we can measure the impact of COVID upon homelessness. If there's a significant, increase in the number of vehicles that we were to count this year, And so, but when you're counting vehicles, and I'll throw in about tents as well, okay, that you want to be able to count the vehicles and count the tents in which you don't see anybody. And the idea is that you can come up with a multiplier that would estimate the number of persons living in the vehicle. So for example, for one COC, I was looking at their data just the other day, last week, I think it was, and they had one source of data and about people in vehicles, and it came out that it was I think it was 1.25, 1.25 persons were living in these vehicles, based on this data that they collected over the past several months. I think it was a little bit more than a year. So that's the idea of how you come up with a multiplier. You have a source of data that kind of gives you a number that's anywhere as from like 1.25 persons to anywhere I've seen it as high as 2.25 persons. But you have to have a source of data, reliable data, for us to be able to do that, to come up with this multiplier. And then the idea of counting the vehicles and even counting the tents in which we don't see anybody is because it's the premise of hey, you want to have something instead of not having it when you realize that you wanted it. So in other words, the idea is, let's just count these vehicles, right? Even if you don't see people in it. Let's even count these tents, even if you don't see people in it, because then we'll deal with it later. But you can't deal with it later very well if you don't have the information ahead of time. So just because you're gathering the number of tents and gathering the number of vehicles ahead of time in which you're not seeing people in, doesn't necessarily mean that you will have to use a multiplier. You can, and so, but you can't wrestle with that later if you didn't collect the number of vehicles and the number of tents that you didn't count people in ahead of time.
Thank you, Joe. Any questions for Joe regarding the vehicle count? And I think that was one of the goals that HUD had originally, when they released their guidance, had originally set, which was to determine the impact of COVID-19 on the homeless population. And it was just really the impact was, has it increased or has it decreased? And this is a really good way to determine that. Has it increased during these last couple of months? Okay, so we're going to move on. Just wanted to mention very briefly, the unsheltered youth count is a priority as well. Once we come up with this methodology that both the general count and the youth count are going to use, we will focus on youth and how we are going to implement the count. We have identified the 2 co-lead agencies that are going to help with this effort. We really want to bring awareness to youth homelessness during this time. And really work with our service providers to help with get an accurate count of youth that are out in the streets. So we will definitely have a youth, unsheltered youth committee and planning committee, because it's important for us to make sure that we implement the count the best way possible. Once again, the planning considerations, we talked about this already. We do have a significant short amount of time, so we want to have these weekly meetings because the feedback you're providing is very important. We did send out with the reminder this morning, our calendar or our schedule for our planning meetings, just so that you have it on your calendar and you do save a date. Every meeting will have a different login information, so we'll send it out to you. But as long as you have it on your calendar, I think it's helpful. And if you always have any questions, my email's on the flyer. You can always reach me, and I will make sure to provide you with the login information. Next steps, as we're getting close to ending this meeting, the next planning meeting is Thursday, December 17th, 1 to 2 p.m. At that meeting, we will have put together a tighter or more cleaner draft of what our methodology is going to look like, have some more discussions on some of those pieces. Like Joe mentioned, we will be meeting not only with William Snow, who's the HUD representative, but also HUD has office hours that we are joining, and all the COCs and everyone that's implementing account is able to ask questions. So we are definitely keeping, maintaining connection with those agencies that can provide us with a lot of feedback and a lot of guidance. So by that next meeting, we might have some updates on the time that is going to help us a little bit structure our methodology and come up with a good draft.
Laura, I want to make sure that folks know we are having a meeting December 10th. So we're not skipping next week, and there will be a meeting next
Did I
week.
miss it? Oh, yes, I did. I apologize for that. So our next meeting is December 10th. Sorry about that. Thank you, Tanya, for pointing that out. So yeah, so that calendar, we'll go ahead and post it as well on our website and send out the calendar invite. So what about other steps? I know we only have 3 minutes for our meeting. Are there any other next steps that you would like to see us start working on in terms of meetings? Yes, but meanwhile, anything that you think would be important as next steps? The incentives, we're going to start working on that, and possibly purchasing the PPEs that we're going to be needing. So we may be doing some purchasing on that end. Anything else that you think would be good next steps before our next meeting on the 10th?
It's Karen. Can you hear me?
Yes, Karen. Go ahead. Oh, we can't hear you anymore. Did you mute?
During the last meeting, I know that there were some stakeholders that were concerned about liability, and I know you guys were going to talk to county council. Did you guys get any feedback about that? I'm not mentioning it saying Corona is concerned, but I know that there were some jurisdictions that were concerned because of COVID.
I can answer that. So yes, we did meet with our county council team and received feedback that we would need to update any, if we decided to use volunteers for the count, and just going to Laura's term about like non-professional volunteers, right? So these are community volunteers that are recruited from whether it be faith-based communities or other community groups or other members of the public that are non-county or contracted homeless outreach staff. So the direction there was we would need to make sure to update our waivers that volunteers would sign, and we would also want to be proactive in ensuring that volunteers who are recruited to assist even with the head count, as a consideration, looking at not utilizing people for that purpose who may be high risk, 65 and older, or have compromised immunities. So we are looking for some direction, some language for this waiver from our federal partners. As Joe mentioned, we have some upcoming meetings, and so we can definitely bring that subject up during our next community planning session, since we anticipate getting more information in the next couple of days.
Thanks, Tanya.
Any other questions before we wrap up? Please just remember to look for the survey that was sent out yesterday and complete it to the best of your knowledge. In it, there is a space for a comment box. If you want to comment anything about the planning point and time count efforts, please do so. And then before you log out, if you please make sure you write in your name and the agency that you represent on the chat box. I'd really appreciate it so we can track attendance.
Where are those emails going to?
I'm sorry. We have a list of attendees, and so we're tracking attendance and keeping a list of individuals with agencies and their emails, and we send those emails to the individual that we have signed up. If you're not receiving it, you can just email me and I can double check to make sure that you're on my list.
What's your email, ma'am?
I'll put it in the chat if that's okay.
Okay.
I'm also going to try to put the link to the survey on the chat box as well. Okay, if there aren't any questions and you received the survey and you received all the information, thank you so much for joining us today, and we hope you have a nice day.
Thank you, everyone. Stay safe, stay healthy. We'll see you next Tuesday.
Go ahead and stop recording.